It's showtime.
Welcome to another episode of When Was That Podcast? This is a show where we look back on who are these podcasts. Today we are taking a look at WATP episode number 2. The show that Kevin and Karl are reviewing is called Stuff Mom Never Told You. This episode of WATP was initially released in March 2016. It is now July 31st, 2025. This is When Was That Podcast? Let's jump in. It was indeed 10 minutes of fluff before we got to something worth writing down.
We go to Japan.
So the first 10 minutes of this podcast, and really the whole of this episode, is tedious. I'll tell you up front. The first 10 minutes of this episode, the show that they are reviewing is a feminist podcast. It shouldn't come to a surprise if you are a listener of WATP. You might know Karl isn't particularly left of center when it comes to most things. And I say that without judgment. I also listen to No Agenda. I kind of understand where Karl is coming from on a lot of things. I don't listen to feminist podcasts. Karl and Kevin don't listen to feminist podcasts. Feminist podcasts are not for us. Of course. But what's made this so tedious is how predictable Karl's opinion is. If you've heard him cover any feminist podcast, you know, anything with Lena Dunham, anything with Dick Masterson. So it's been 10 minutes of very tedious. Well, of course Karl's going to say that, and Karl's just repeating himself and just repeating himself and just repeating himself. He sounds very similar to how he does today. However, we do at 10 minutes and 52 seconds get to an excellent ISO. Let's check it out.
In a fat dude.
You leaving the house is creepy.
Well,
I don't know why you would step foot out of that apartment. Stay inside.
I'm sorry, did I say an excellent ISO? That would be an excellent ISO, but Karl's microphone sucks. So 10 minutes in, Karl and Kevin are already jabbing each other, which is what they should do. You know, they're obviously friends. Some might say, this might almost be, this might count almost as a banter. You can tell that Karl and Kevin are both getting very bored because 11 minutes, 25 seconds in, Karl wants to be a history teacher.
Entire groups of people and claiming the women for our own.
Again, she was using as many $10 words as she possibly could. The basic premise is the West discovered the Far East, and the Far East were superior. And so the West, because they couldn't conquer them, decided to say, well, the women are...
Remember, this is a comedy podcast where we make fun of podcasts.
Is that an accurate summarization of what she was saying?
Yeah, and that's what I take from it, too. And I think there's a clip I had, too, that was...
An oversized clitoris.
They talk about...
Yeah.
I don't know why they get on that subject, but...
So I'm bored, you're bored, they're bored, feminists are bored as well, everyone's bored. Well, lucky for us, Karl, the history teacher, decides that he's not a historian, but 14 minutes, let's go.
They couldn't conquer them, so they had to feminize or fetishize, I guess is the word that they like to use, the entire region. I'm not a historian, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but the West never tried to conquer the East. The Mongolians made it pretty far into Europe, so it did go the other way around. There's this incident I just read about where the U.S. dropped atomic bombs in Japan.
Okay, Karl. I know you say you're not a historian, but you should know nukes aren't real.
So it seems like the West has actually had a pretty good track record beating up on the East. So that the whole premise of the show is just historically inaccurate. made up. I don't even know where they came up with it.
It sounds like you were reading a textbook because I don't even know any of that shit. But
This is even more tedious than the first 10 minutes. This podcast episode is 40 minutes long. I don't have any notes until minute 27. So let's jump ahead. Let's jump ahead a bit because there's a lot of Karl rambling. Kevin really doesn't offer a whole lot. And that's not a criticism of Kevin. I wouldn't have anything to add either because we're all in agreement. These feminists don't really know what they're talking about. The Feminist podcast is a podcast for not us. We don't have the language to understand it. And that's fine. That's just how the world is. At 31:20, Karl talks about getting angry.
All joking aside, I was actually getting very angry. About the 40-minute mark,
Yeah.
I stopped it and I was like, okay, we're doing this for fun. Calm down. I was actually getting angry.
yeah, there's
Imagine getting angry at a podcast. Good on Karl for recognizing that no podcast is worth getting angry over. The Dabbleverse wouldn't be what it is if everyone had his wisdom. Again, this is a 40-minute podcast episode. At 32 minutes, Kevin finally offers something. And again, this is tedious. This is a tedious thing to want to respond to. It's mind-numbing. But Kevin wants to talk about his positive points about this podcast. He wants to talk about, he has a list of, he wants to describe the things that he liked about this feminist podcast. 3205.
We don't really talk about positives a lot. I'm glad to hear you bring this up. I can think of a one. So yeah, okay. Go ahead.
There are some positives here. And it's going to be from a purely geeky technical standpoint. The podcast is recorded beautifully. Everything was perfect. The levels were great. You could hear everything really nice. They have a good mix with the audio coming in and out, like the theme song.
I would say this is a more significant observation if this podcast were independent, but when I Googled stuff Mom never told you about, I got an iHeartMedia page. So this podcast is, and I'm sure it was at the time, because these women they don't seem to do anything but podcasts about feminism. For a company like iHeartMedia that invests heavily in finding all of these different niche markets to invest in producing shows for, even if the shows aren't very good. That's why so many of these, that's why so many left of center political podcasts, feminist podcasts, they all sound like NPR, because they're podcasts that are being produced for the listener who's already trained to listen to NPR. I'm not trained for that. I doubt you are either. It would be a technical achievement for me, who knows nothing about audio, to produce an entire analog recording system with the mix board and the microphone, and is it recording to tape or is it recording to a hard drive through USB? That would be an achievement in a sense, even if it's just a little one. It would be cool, because it's less about the quality of the podcast at that point, and it would be more to me about learning about how all of these components are supposed to work together. But it's 2025. I've got a DJI microphone that I'm speaking into. Not that big of a deal, not very technical. This is all to say, I would expect I imagine that Stuff Mom Never Told You was a podcast produced with a lot of money behind it. Of course, they'll have a professional audio engineer producing the show, instead of a show like the one you're listening to now, where I speak into a DJI microphone. Turning my notes over, at 36:15, Karl has a hot take.
It's rough to hear this and then be like, wow, Like, you're automatically a creep. Like, that's already in the lexicon now. That's just the way it is. There's my $10 word.
We both, from experience, have enjoyed the Asian females, and it doesn't stop me from enjoying other females as well. Right. Even those awful Jewish ones who won't suck your penis. But I give them all a chance, you know?
I'm sure Lucy Tightbox would be happy to know that you'll give her a chance, Karl. At minute 37, Kevin sums up every politically motivated podcast ever.
Comes across racist in the wrong... Like, I don't think they intended it to come across that way in this podcast, but...
Well, so Kevin sums up the problem with every political podcast ever, and this is left and right. You know, the people who claim to be in the center, the way language works is words are elastic. Language is an anarchy, and that's why political podcasts. If you take what any political podcaster has to say, you can find situations and examples and contexts where what they say makes no sense at all. Language doesn't always accurately 100% of the time mean what we think ought to be the objective definition of things. And so political podcasts don't ever really serve to change anyone's mind. They only serve to reinforce what you already believe, because if you're seeking a political podcast, you're going to be listening for the language that you understand, not the language that the other side understands. And that's why podcasting hasn't solved any sort of political problem. It will never be solved, not in our lifetime. Fundamentally, political podcasts are always going to skew one way or the other, but they'll never skew towards fun. And WATP should be a fun show. It is a fun show now, but this was not a fun episode. But it gets even worse. At 37:46, Karl's microphone jumps into a pool. Listen to this.
Yes, I don't like putting down...
Talking about what we just did?
Well, that too, but I mean...
So it is at this point of the show where I say thank you for checking out When Was That Podcast? A look back at WATP episode number 2. And for funsies, I'd like to introduce a new segment where we check up on the podcast that Karl and Kevin took a look at, and that was Stuff Your Mom Never Told You. Well, without listening to the episode, I can tell you that this show is still being made. It is hosted on iHeart. It's recorded and produced, but with audio engineers, not amateurs such as myself. Stuff Mom Never Told You. It is hosted by Annie Reese and Samantha McVeigh. Neither look like they have a personality, and I don't care to find out. Their latest episode was released today, July 31st, 2025. Well, it would actually be very unprofessional for me to mention, I don't want to listen to this podcast, but the professional thing to do would probably be to check it out. So let's check it out real quick. Holy crap. Never mind. What a mistake that is. 3 minutes of ads. No. That's 3 minutes of ads in the audio track. And then then iHeart is making me watch a big pharma ad. 4 minutes total of ads before we get to this podcast episode. Holy crap.
And if you are enjoying things that you usually partake of in happy hour, please do so responsibly. We are currently not being sponsored by any of the things we're talking about. Coffee. Yes, I'm drinking your also not favorite Dr. Pepper. Zero.
Oh, no.
Cream soda. I love this. Like, this is my favorite thing.
All right, I'm 1 minute in, and these retards are just going back and forth about their drinks and why soda is bad. I'm tapping out.